Hi, good morning, everyone. As Susan mentioned, I'm Ron Hammock. I'm the chair of the State Association Young Professional Network. And this year we kind of overhauled our state mission and our structure really to become a hub for communication and to be a resource more to the local boards, YP networks, rather than being independent and running our own events and affairs. Um, we have active networks now on Oahu, Maui, Big Island, and Kauai, as well as, the YPN of Oahu, which is represented here today. The last thing we're going to be rolling out this year is a formal mentorship program. Really what we're looking to do is to pair top producing agents as well as managing brokers with YPs that could benefit from some one-on-one time with them. And today I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, Daria Loigoto. She's Complaints and Enforcement Officer with the Regulated Industries Complaint Office, also known as RICO. And prior to becoming the top enforcement officer, Daria worked at RICO as a staff attorney and for over 10 years served as its supervising attorney. An Oregon native, Daria graduated from Willamette University in 1987 with a BA in English. She then went on to graduate from Willamette's College of Law in 1990. And Daria is a member of the bar in both Oregon and Hawaii. Please join me in welcoming Daria Loigoto.
I was just explaining that with a name like Daria, you answer to anything. And with a job title, Complaints and Enforcement Officer, you hear everything. So, okay, well, hey, thank you very much to the association for having me out to speak today. I just want to echo, first of all, start off by echoing a couple of things that Susan had said earlier today. Uh, she talked a little bit about working with government agencies and the importance of bringing government agencies kind of into your world. As the complaints and enforcement officer with oversight over 49 different agencies or industries, I feel a lot of times that we're operating in a vacuum. So in our plush state offices, we sometimes have a little bit of a disconnect about what may be happening out in the real world. Your flood insurance problem that Susan mentioned is a good example of that. It could be that there is an issue that a government agency doesn't actually realize is an issue. So, in that respect, it is important, and I do welcome feedback and indications that there are things that the industry is trying to address that maybe, just maybe, government can try to assist to help you out on. The other thing that I will mention later on is the importance of standard forms. And I can tell you just anecdotally, as a staff attorney looking at a case, when I'm wondering whether or not all the disclosures have been made, it is sometimes pretty easy to know that if a standard form was used, we've seen it before, we know certain information is in there that may make resolving a case that much easier. Okay, with that said, I always try to get kind of a feel for the people that attend an event. Can I see a show of hands of how many principal brokers may be out there? Okay, anybody doing property management? Okay, well, intrepid people, all of you. So, okay, without further ado, the Regulated Industries Complaints Office is a government agency. We work with the boards and commissions to investigate and prosecute complaints in all 49 licensed professions and locations in the state of Hawaii, except for lawyers, because nobody wants to oversee lawyers. Uh, as 49 industries, I can tell you jacks of all trade and masters of none. Uh, as uh, as our mandate is pretty broad, I can tell you I know a little bit about a variety of things: contracting, real estate, mixed martial arts, massage therapy. Um, it is sometimes challenging for us as an agency to get a handle on all of the laws and rules that we enforce. And that's why, again, I do welcome input and I do welcome information from the the areas that we cover. Okay, as Susan mentioned, we just picked up appraisal management companies this past year, so we will start enforcement in that area as well. As you know, federal law requires banks to use impartial appraisers, and some banks, I believe, will use an independent appraisal mortgage company as the go-between to ensure that the appraisal has been conducted in an independent fashion. So we're happy and willing to take on appraisal management companies this year. I can tell you that we are. I am more thrilled about doing that than some of the other possible industries that were bandied about this past session. One of which was dog grooming, and the other of which was towing companies. I cannot even imagine the kinds of complaints you get about towing companies, especially in the middle of the night on some bar in some rural area. So, okay, so first of all, who complains? I will start by saying that generally most complaints are consumer driven. I will note that complaints is kind of a misnomer that we work under. And the reason for that is a consumer can complain to us about an issue, and our office may actually investigate something else. So, what our office does is investigate and prosecute licensing law violations by licensees and also unlicensed activity by non licensed persons engaging in activity in the state. So, what I mean by that divide that a consumer may have when they come to our office is, for example, a consumer may file a complaint with us that alleges a realtor who represented both the seller and the buyer failed to disclose certain information during the course of about the property. While the consumer very much wants RICO to look at that alleged failure to disclose, while RICO may look at that, RICO may also pick up that although the licensee represented both the seller and the buyer, there was no signed dual agency agreement. And I will throw that out there right now, harkening back to those standard forms. Today, we still get cases alleging that there's been no execution of a dual agency agreement. I can tell you that when you help friends, when you help neighbors, when you help your aunt, they will file a complaint if they have to. So don't think that that personal relationship is going to protect you or absolve you of getting a complaint filed against you or a lawsuit filed against you. So while a consumer may want RICO to do something, RICO, our mandate is enforcement of licensing law violations. A good example of this, and we get this complaint all the time, being made to wait over an hour in your doctor's office, not a licensing law violation. If it was, based on the complaints that we get, we may have additional cases in that area. Okay, so I can tell you that in terms of consumers coming to our office, we are in the process of doing a little bit of re-education, a little bit of rebranding. So what we don't want is for a consumer to think that by filing a complaint with our office, they don't have to pursue any civil action they may have, that RICO is going to represent them with whatever dispute they may have. And what we tell consumers from the get-go is we do not represent you. You need to go pursue whatever legal remedies you may have. So in doing that, what we are trying to do is to better explain to consumers what RICO may enforce and why they may want to consider filing a complaint with our office. And hopefully that 7,000 inquiry number that we had in fiscal year 2016 is going to drop as consumers better understand what our office may or may not be looking at. We actually used to ask a question on the complaint form, which was, what are you seeking as a resolution to your complaint? And when we stepped back and took a look at that sentence, what I think it was really saying to us is that potentially a consumer is going to say, this is what I want, and I have an expectation that RICO is going to get it for me. So we're in the process of tweaking that. Again, a little bit of rebranding going on. And now what we're saying is, if we are able to assist, what would a possible resolution be? And the reason why we're asking that is of the high number of complaints that come to us, many of them could be addressed because most of them will be a simple miscommunication between the licensee and the consumer. So, for example, a consumer who will file a complaint because all they're trying to do is get a copy of a written repair estimate. On the front end, our office may reach out to the licensee and encourage the licensee to speak with the consumer to try and get that repair estimate delivered. So before consumers file a complaint with our office, what we're asking them to do, and what we're asking on the complaint form, is have you tried to resolve this dispute with the licensee? Very easy question to ask. We're also providing them a template letter that they can use to write to a licensee to try to spell out what their concern is. And I can tell you that sometimes it is very difficult for a consumer to actually express what they really want as part of the dispute. But being able to put it in writing, being able to send it to the licensee, we think that is going to be a good step. So, if you get a letter from a client and the letter reads, Rico recommended that I write to you, or there is a CC on the bottom of the letter, CCing to Rico, then that is an indication to you that that consumer has probably reached out to our office already and that potentially a complaint may be filed. Okay, so what other kinds of complaints do we get? Other kinds of information that we get? I don't actually have statistics on the number of cases that we create based on complaints. And I'll tell you that that's because we're working off a Wang database that we're in the process of replacing. But the other area that we get referrals from is from the real estate commission itself. So consumers writing to the real estate commission, commission board staff who may find things and report it to us. The other area is from other licensees. Competitors know how to find our office. Competitors know how to find our office. And I can tell you that we understand that concept very well, and we evaluate each case, regardless of where it comes from, for two things, which is a possible licensing law violation and sufficiency of information, regardless of where the complaint is coming from. We work closely with law enforcement and other oversight agencies, including probably less for this profession, but state real estate boards across the nation. Current and former employees, and I should add to this, former spouses. If you have a former spouse and they ever touched your books or managed your office, they may find us. Right, and also staff initiated. We have a very capable group of intake people who regularly read the Star Advertiser and other publications, and I can tell you that we end up generating quite a few cases on our own every year. So regardless of where that information comes from, again, what our office is looking for is a possible violation of the licensing laws and sufficiency of evidence. And if there isn't a possible violation, then our office shouldn't be looking at that complaint. All right, so what do you do if a complaint gets filed against you? Okay, well, first of all, I'll start again by saying that anyone can file a complaint. Anyone can file a complaint. And what we've learned over time is that sometimes people who file complaints with our office will cast the facts in a way that will probably make the agency want to jump up and take a look at their complaint. So we do take all information the same way that it comes to us. And again, analyzing it for that sufficiency of evidence, sufficiency of information, and whether or not there's a possible licensing law violation. I will tell you that over 50% of the complaints that we receive are being closed at the intake level without formal investigation. So that means that an intake investigator has reached out as part of a preliminary investigation and gotten additional information. Usually that begins with the other side of the story. So, as you all know, when your child comes to you and says, "This is exactly what my big brother did to you," like my parents, what's the first thing they do? Call the big brother in, get the other side of the story. And that's what RICO is really trying to do. We do not take complaints that we receive at face value. We will independently try to verify that information. And a lot of that is done through the assistance of licensees who we may reach out to and ask them to participate in that initial process. All right, and the last thing I'll share with you is that last year an estimated 6,431 complaints were resolved before a complaint was filed. So that is consumers reaching out to us and saying, "I have a possible complaint," and maybe writing to the licensee and getting that dispute resolved. Okay, so what do you do when you get a complaint? We want you to keep in mind this and these numbers. I estimate that the number of licensees that we're actually disciplining is probably less than 5% of the licensing population. So, for the most part, we would like to think that licensees are complying or trying to comply with the licensing laws that are out there. All right, so here's what not to do. I share this statistic all the time, and it's probably out of date, but years ago, the Oregon State Bar published a report on the number of licensees who have been revoked in that state and for what reason why. 50% of the licensees were getting revoked because they never entered an appearance during the investigation process. And those are lawyers. And I can tell you that this ostrich effect happens with licensees all the time. They get the call from RICO and all of a sudden they seize up. And the worst thing that I think you can do is end up going to a formal disciplinary action hearing because you have, and that be your first appearance as part of the RICO complaint process. So keep in mind when a complaint gets filed against you that 6,431 matters that got closed out by RICO at the front end, and we really do encourage you to participate in that investigation process. Right, so not only is your cooperation appreciated, it's required. You actually have a Hawaii administrative rule that requires you as a licensee to participate with, to cooperate with the real estate commission, and that includes cooperating with investigations. And I can tell you that we have prosecuted cases against licensees who have refused subpoenas or otherwise thwarted a RICO investigation. All right, the question that I get all the time with real estate licensees, because you're a dual licensing program, is the principal broker always named if a complaint is filed against a real estate salesperson? I will tell you, if you're a principal broker or broker in charge, I give you credit because you're responsible for so many things under the law. But I will tell you that we do not automatically always initiate a case against the principal broker for every single transgression that may happen under your roof. The reason for that is we recognize that sometimes there are actions that an employee may take. A good example of that is absconding with $50,000 from the client trust account that may not be preventable or may not come to light unless a lot of other things happen first. What you can do as a principal broker is make sure that you have policies and procedures in place that protect you if you ever have an issue with one of the real estate salespeople that you oversee. All right, so the answer to that question is maybe. Okay, sometimes, not always. All right, common complaints that the office receives. All right, failing to report change of mailing address timely. I'm going to throw out a number for you that's probably going to skew our stat from last year, but we currently have probably about 200 or 300 cases that involve the change form, and the change form not being submitted timely to the real estate commission. Okay. So, failing to report change of mailing address timely. Rule is pretty simple, uh, and it is as tight. That 10-day deadline is as tight as 45 days on a like kind exchange. The licensee shall notify the commission of any change in writing within 10 days of that change. A lot of licensees will use the renewal process as a means of updating the commission to let them know my address changed uh, um, through that process. But I can tell you, you may not be able to rely on that because you're only renewing your license once every 2 years. So if you are waiting for the renewal process and that renewal process is outside of that 10 days, I can tell you, you are going to get dinged by the real estate branch, and they are going to refer a case to RICO. So there is a change form that the Real Estate Commission provides on the Real Estate Commission website. If you have a change in address, make sure that you complete the form and that you send it in. One of the reasons why I'm here today, one of the reasons why I like working with organizations is the education piece. I can tell you that RICO is not suffering for work. Uh, we have plenty of work, and we're not looking to make cases. So the more education we can get out there to licensees so that I don't have to think about the discussion I have to have with our intake supervisor because she's a little concerned about the 200 or 300 cases we have sitting in intake that all have to do with change forms and how our 10 staff attorneys are going to be able to get through those. The better and the more education that we can put out there for licensees, the less gray my hair gets faster time. Okay. Another common complaint, failing to report employee changes timely. I know that the change form is a little challenging in that it asks for 3 signatures on it. The releasing broker, the salesperson, and the hiring broker. And I always kind of liken it to like getting a divorce. I've let this employee go, but I need you to sign this form before you leave. So we know that that can be challenging. And we know that if you hand that form over to the salesperson and say, get it signed by your hiring broker, and then get it into the commission within 10 days, that may or may not happen. But if that's the situation, you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself. If you need to execute another form and send it to the Real Estate Commission, I do understand that the licensing branch will accept that form in triplicate. So, address changes, licensees employed or associated with firms. I can tell you that by looking at the 200 or 300 referrals that we have right now, I can tell you a recurring pattern, and that recurring pattern is I may have released 6 salespersons this year, and I'm gonna submit all the change forms at one time at the end of the year. Okay, that is clearly outside of that 10-day, and you need to make sure that you get that change form in. All right, again, do you see a pattern emerging here? Failing to release a licensee from employment or association, again, that change form, uh, the rules require that a principal broker or broker in charge release a licensee from employment uh, on request within 10 days on written request. So again, submit the change form timely and respond to requests from former employees who are writing to you or coming to you or want to meet with you because they need to get that change form signed. I can tell you that when a salesperson comes to us and says that the releasing broker refused to give me paperwork or refused to assist me in that process, that is something that our office is going to preliminarily look at. All right, another common complaint: licensees handling transactions outside of the brokerage firm. Around 2008, when the real estate market kind of started to, when bad things kind of happened in the economy, we saw a number of licensees who had previously been in sales who all of a sudden were doing property management. It is possible that the skill set to do sales and the skill set to do property management may be different. probably the accounting, I can tell you absolutely the accounting is different. So a lot of licensees found themselves getting into hot water because whereas in sales realm they were relying on escrow to handle that money, all of a sudden they were handling hundreds, if not thousands, of units or properties that they were monthly collecting money on. So we did see a lot of licensees after that run into significant problems on the property management side. So you'll take home with you today Rico's top 10 tips for licensees who are engaged in property management. Uh, and I also wanted to raise this with you because this kind of falls along the same line, and that is with the rise in short-term rentals. Everybody's got a friend or a neighbor who wants to rent their property. We do see a lot of licensees, licensed salespeople, who are taking on these side agreements to either rent or to list properties on the side. Licensees should realize, licensed salespeople should realize that the broker needs to know and that the transactions that are being done outside of that brokerage can trigger the following violations. So, first of all, the law says salesperson and employee shall not handle trust properties without express written authorization of the principal broker or the broker in charge. The law also says that a real estate salesperson can't act as a real estate broker. And sorry, there's a typo on there. Without a license outside of the real estate brokerage. So when you have a real estate broker, a salesperson who is handling a transaction outside of the brokerage, that real estate salesperson is acting as a real estate broker. Additionally, any funds that they're collecting are arguably client trust fund monies. Most of those salespeople who are handling these side industries do not have client trust accounts to move that money to. And not having a client trust account, not putting your money into client's money into a client trust account will definitely land your complaint on the desk of some legal staff attorney. So if you're a broker in charge, make sure your salespeople understand that if they are renting or if they're listing property, that those transactions should come through the brokerage. And if you're a real estate salesperson and you're listing your aunt's property for short-term rental or whatever, you need to make sure that you have that discussion with your brokerage. All right, convictions for driving under the influence. I get this question all the time. The answer is yes. The Real Estate Commission does regularly address these violations, including driving under the influence, as a criminal conviction that is related to the profession. So I'm here today to tell you, don't drink and drive. Don't drink and drive. I actually have a process where all of the referrals from the boards and commissions come to me first because I am very interested in seeing what is coming in the front door of the RICO office. It is very time consuming, and I can tell you because every single week, there are reports of driving under the influence by licensed real estate brokers and salespersons. So please don't drink and drive. Uncommon complaints to note. Okay, broker in charge is absent and no temporary broker in charge has been appointed. It is very, very hard again to run a business. I get that. But if you're going to be absent, you need to make sure that you appoint somebody to be in charge. And the reason for that is, again, look back at all the requirements that a broker in charge or a principal broker has to do. They've got to make sure that they're maintaining that client trust account. They need to make sure that the salesperson and the brokerage are getting appropriate education, continuing education and training. They're responsible for basically everything, including every single transaction that's going through that brokerage. So the principal broker has to submit a signed written notification designated a temporary principal broker or broker in charge. It is good for only 6 months, and it can be renewed only once. So what this is saying to you is that the real estate commission is saying you can have a temporary, but the maximum time that temporary can be in place is going to be 1 year. And after that, you're going to need to start making additional arrangements. Right, I will tell you a funny story before we move on to this, and that is we did run into a licensed contractor who, or an unlicensed contractor, who was continuing to run the contracting business uh, after the responsible managing employee for the corporation died. And when we actually asked when the death occurred, it had been 10 years. So, uh, contracting law is a little bit different, but the message is don't think that you can continue to operate the firm without a licensee at the helm. Right, so advertising using an unregistered trade name. And I will tell you that arguably what we said was for any construction contracts during that 10-year time period, that's all unlicensed because the firm shouldn't have been licensed and operating. And because there was no responsible managing employee signing off on the contract. Sorry, advertising using an unregistered trade name. We understand that there's a lot of questions, a lot of discussions. I get a lot of questions to me every day about can I advertise as a trade with using a trade name. So you will go home with you today just a copy of an article from the Real Estate Commission's bulletin about advertising in using team names. But the rule is that all advertising has to include the licensee's legal name, the name is licensed by the commission, or the sole proprietor's trade name. We do understand that you can register a trade name. Make sure that you understand there's a difference between the business registration, registering a trade name with the Business Registration Division of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, and actually reporting it to the Real Estate Commission. Those are two different things. So, unlicensed cases all the time. No, I'm licensed. I have a trade name. Okay, license, trade name, two different things. So, in order to comply with this rule, you're going to have to reach out to the Real Estate Commission and report that trade name. Discrepancies in client trust fund accounts. We understand that managing money is hard, but when you have a client trust fund account and there are checks written to Oceanic Cable or some private school, that is a pretty good indication that funds are not being used appropriately for that client trust fund account. All right, so the rule here, don't play with other people's money. Don't. If your company is in trouble and you've got a float from the client trust fund account, don't. Because I can tell you that violations of the client trust fund account are going to be the type where that case is going to go directly to our legal section for review. Right, so the rules are simple. Licensees, you can't convert other people's money to your own use. Floating money from the client trust fund, using it to cover your rent until for a couple of 30 days or so, that's converting money to, that's conversion. And that definitely violates the licensing law. The principal broker or broker in charge can authorize an employee to place funds, but keep in mind that broker in charge or the PB is responsible for disposition of those funds. So while you may have somebody doing deposits, withdrawals are a different matter altogether. All right, some other matters that have been coming up of late, and I understand that there are a lot of questions, island to island, that we've been hearing from about short-term property, short-term rental management. In the past couple of years, you know, at the legislature, that short-term rental management is a really hot topic. The way it's been coming to RICO is a couple of different ways. So the first is what I would like to say indirect issues. Okay, there is something I like to say, I like to call jurisdictional creep. And it seems like because RICO is in office with investigators and with attorneys, a lot of people seem to think, well, let's just have RICO do it because they're set up to do it. But we're set up to handle licensing laws and licensing law violations only. So when people came to us a couple of years ago and said, uh, we think RICO should handle zoning issues, our response was zoning is a city and county issue, and we're going to push that back to the counties. The other area where people have approached us is the enforcement of non-payment of taxes related to short-term rental management. And the Regulated Industries Complaints Office is not the Department of Tax. Um, and that's another area where RICO has been very concerned about possibly picking up enforcement of non-payment of taxes in this area. The question for licensees, though, is if you are handling a short-term rental and you have either the property either does not meet zoning requirements or taxes have not been paid on that. The question is going to be whether or not those violations will affect your license, because as a licensee, you're required to generally comply with Hawaii laws related to property. Some direct issues that have come up, and I do think that will continue to come up for our office, is going to be mismanagement of funds. As the short-term rental market picks up and more people are doing it, then again, mismanagement of funds is something that we're definitely going to look at, and whether or not those client trusted funds are being handled appropriately. And again, management activity outside of the brokerage firm. Unlicensed real estate property management always seems to start one way. You've got some owner from Canada who has a condo on a neighbor island, and he or she is renting that condo for themselves, which they're allowed to do. And all of a sudden, all the neighbors are coming to them and saying, hey, I see you're doing such a great job renting your unit. Can you rent mine as well? And before you know it, that person has a website and is handling more than one unit in that association. I can tell you that the internet has not been kind to us. For unlicensed activity, we will oftentimes seek not only an injunction that prohibits the unlicensed activity, but an order to cut off the unlicensed phone number or to close down a website. I can tell you that by the time we get to court and we have an order in hand to close a website, that website has turned over 2 or 3 times. So that is an area that we are continuing to look at, we are continuing to monitor, and that we are continuing to have discussions about, and where I do think that RICO's role with the property management is going to increase as time goes on. All right, so trending issues. We understand that there's probably been legislation related to short-term rentals in about 24, 25, 26 states in the past year. So, and additionally, large cities, international cities, Amsterdam, London, a lot of countries in the UK are trying to address the short-term management issue and to try to get ahead of it. The question that RICO is looking at is whether or not these online platforms may be engaged in unlicensed practice of real estate by offering property for rent in the state of Hawaii. We are monitoring litigation that's going on by the state of New York against a major online platform, and we will continue to work with the Real Estate Commission and also agencies like yours to flesh out the definition of property management and rental property in the state of Hawaii. I do think that New York has some additional language that I think is going to assist them in that lawsuit. So we will continue to monitor that. But possible unlicensed activity by these online platforms is going to be a thing. If you are working with an online platform and that online platform is engaged in unlicensed activity, then as a licensee, that could affect your license. And the way it does that is that the law says that aiding and abetting unlicensed activity is a violation of the law. Typically, we see aiding and abetting by real estate licensees in terms of contracting, unlicensed plumbing, unlicensed electrical work. So you are managing a rental property, you want to get something fixed, you call an unlicensed plumber who's available to come in and take care of it. I can tell you that using an unlicensed plumber, especially for doing stuff behind the wall, never seems to really work out well. And what's going to happen is Rico is going to get a complaint about that unlicensed plumber. And the unlicensed plumber may or may not be around by the time that complaint gets filed. But who is around? The licensed real estate salesperson or broker who brought them into the unit in the first place. And homeowners will find us and they will rat you out. So, accepting commissions or other compensation for someone who is not licensed is the other area that's going to trigger with these online platforms. So if you're working with an online platform and they're deemed to be engaged in unlicensed activity and you are taking commissions or other compensation, that may trigger that. Right, so here is the most important slide, which is my contact information. Again, we are very, very committed to the education and outreach part of what we do, and we are very, very committed to hearing from organizations like this and from licensees who may have concerns or questions about how to do business in the state. So once again, I would like to thank the Hawaii Association of Realtors for having us out, and have a terrific rest of the day.